They sent her to a blood hunter mountain man to die, but he offered her food, warmth, and protection. The wind had teeth that night. It howled across the jagged ridges of Blood Hunter Mountain, scouring the pine needles from the branches and rattling the frozen shutters of the small, abandoned cabin. Snow had begun its silent descent hours ago, covering the ground in a crisp, merciless white. Every step taken on that cold crust made a hollow crack like a gunshot in the void. She stumbled through the knee-deep snow, her thin coat no match for the frost that gnawed at her bones. Her hands were raw, red and blistering, and her boots, if they could be called that, were cracked, soaked, useless against the winter's cruelty. She'd been sent here to die. They'd whispered about the man who lived in the mountains, a hunter, they said, who wore human blood like a cloak, who answered the wind with gunfire, that he would not spare mercy for the weak, the women, or the children. But when the snow swallowed her vision and her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, she could not stop, could not hide, could not even think, only move. The faint glint of firelight caught her eye, a reflection through the swirling snow between the skeletal trees. She fell to her knees, coughing, nose running, vision blurred. A figure stepped from the shadows. Broad shoulders, dark coat dusted with snow, a rifle held loosely in one hand. His face was hidden under a hood, but the edges of his beard, streaked with frost, betrayed the rawness of the cold. "You shouldn't be here," the man said. His voice was low, gravelly, like the gravel paths that ran down the mountainside, carrying echoes of rocks dislodged from the cliff above. It was not an accusation. It was a statement. He was blood-hungry for nothing but truth. "Move another step, and it'll cost you." She tried to speak. Her lips were blue, trembling with cold. Words would not come. Her throat was raw, cracked from the wind and from fear. She couldn't explain herself, couldn't plead. The hunter's mark had been stamped on her back, in whispers, in fear, and in threats. But she was only a girl, frail, hungry, and terrified. He studied her for a long beat. His eyes, sharp as icicles, did not flinch. Then he moved, slowly, deliberately, until he was crouched before her. From the pocket of his coat he pulled a canteen and a folded cloth. He knelt in the snow beside her. "Drink," he said, tilting it to her lips. Her hands shook as she took it, tilting the canteen, spilling half across the snow. He did not flinch, did not scold. He simply pressed the cloth to her lips, wiping the frost and dirt away. "There, that's better," he murmured. Her eyes, dark and wide, blinked up at him. Confusion, suspicion, and faint recognition swirled together. She knew him not, yet his presence carried a warmth she had not felt since the men had thrown her from the wagon. He offered no promises. He offered only the small, immediate things: warmth, water, protection. And perhaps that was enough. For now. "Name?" he asked. A simple question, quiet, but with weight. She had none. Or if she did, the mountain wind had stolen it. She could not remember. She could not trust herself to speak it aloud. She shook her head. He gave a slow nod, eyes never leaving hers. "We'll find you one then." With that, he rose. He offered a hand. Tentatively, she accepted, wincing as her frozen fingers clutched his calloused ones. He helped her to her feet, steadying her, guiding her through the snow toward a cabin built from jagged timber, half buried by drifts, smoke curling lazily from its crooked chimney. He moved with the surety of someone born in the mountains, someone who knew every step of every ridge, every hidden snowbank. Inside, the cabin was dim, the fire low but alive, a soft orange glow pushing back the cold. He led her to a small cot against the wall. "Sit. Rest." His voice did not command. It simply existed. A force like gravity, like the mountain itself. She sank onto the cot, shivering, wrapping herself in the threadbare blanket he had draped over her shoulders. The smell of wood smoke and dried meat filled her nose. Her stomach roared, but she could not force herself to ask. He moved around the cabin, gathering kindling, stirring a small fire, the flames reflecting off his face in fleeting, sharp moments. He set a pot to heat and placed dried bread and a small chunk of salted meat inside. The warmth began to seep into her frozen limbs, slow and hesitant, like the first rays of a sun that had been hidden too long behind clouds. "Eat," he said, setting the small bowl before her. His eyes lingered on hers. "No one's coming for you here tonight. Not in the snow, not in the wind, not in this mountain." She took the food, trembling, her hands fumbling. He watched without impatience, without intrusion. The quiet was heavy, filled with the kind of tension only found in places where survival balanced on the edge of a knife. Hours passed in silence. She tried to eat, she tried to speak. Only the crackling of fire and the occasional groan of the old cabin settled around them. At some point, the wind outside softened. The firelight drew her gaze to the man. There was no malice, no hunger for her life, only awareness, only watchfulness. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, voice a fragile whisper, nearly lost to the fire. He did not answer at once. Instead, he sat across from her, knees drawn to his chest, eyes shadowed. "Because," he said finally, "some things aren't meant to be ended in snow and blood, even if others think they should." His gaze flicked to the fire, then back at her. "Some things deserve to live." The truth of the mountain settled into her chest, heavy and uncertain. For the first time in days, she dared to breathe without the immediate terror clawing at her lungs. The man, the hunter, had chosen not to be her executioner. Not tonight. Not in this snowstorm, on this merciless ridge of the world. And in that choice, she found the faintest flicker of warmth. Not in her hands, not in her stomach, not even fully in her chest, but inside her, where fear had nearly drowned her entirely. Outside, the storm raged still, indifferent, unrelenting. Inside, a fire glowed, food warmed the body, and a man who could have killed her instead offered protection. And for the first time, she began to imagine the impossible. Surviving. The snow had thickened by morning, covering the forest floor in a muted white, the kind that swallowed sound and blurred edges. She awoke to the muffled hush, the cabin dim with smoke and shadow. The hunter was already moving, the fire crackling softly as he prepared a thin broth of roots and salted meat. The smell alone made her stomach clench with both hunger and unease. He noticed her watching, eyes wide, hands curled around the blanket. "Eat," he said again, not impatient but firm. The words were simple, but carried the weight of someone who had seen too much to waste breath on false comforts. Hesitating, she took the bowl, hands trembling, and sipped slowly, tasting warmth for the first time in days. "Name?" he asked, eyes not leaving her face, steady as the mountain itself. She swallowed hard, shook her head. No answer, no words, only cold and fear and the memory of men who had hunted her, whispered about her, sent her to this frozen ridge with nothing but the thought of death for company. He leaned back slightly, as if weighing the shape of her fear against the shape of the world. "That's fine," he murmured. "We'll find one. For now, just breathe." She watched him, and in that moment she saw it. Not a blood hunter, as the stories said, not a man clad in shadow and violence, but someone who understood survival in its rawest form. Someone who had lived and endured, and still offered the small, impossible gestures of care. Hours passed. Snow drifted thicker, muffling the cabin from the outside world. The hunter cleaned the small kitchen area with mechanical precision, filling the small cracks in the cabin with warmth and movement. She stayed on the cot, watching, listening, feeling the slow heat creep into her frozen limbs. Her teeth still chattered, her hands remained red and swollen, but she could breathe without panic, and for now, that was enough. "Tell me what happened," he said after a while, voice low, almost a whisper, not pressing, merely inviting. She did not answer at first. Only the faintest shiver moved through her, a tremor caught somewhere between fear and memory. The wind outside rattled the shutters, and snow pressed against the cabin walls like a living thing. She could not hide from it, and now, perhaps, she could not hide from him. "They sent me," she said finally, words clipped, thin as frost, "to die. They said you'd kill me." Her voice cracked and faltered, but she spoke. The words were not accusation. They were mere acknowledgement of the truth she had carried through frozen forests and barren ridges. He did not flinch, did not react in the way her imagination had expected. "They lie," he said. "They always lie." His hands rested on his knees, large and calloused, steady as the mountains themselves. "And I do not." For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of fire and the wind shifting against the eaves. Then she spoke again, smaller this time. "I have nowhere, no name, no place, nothing." He looked at her closely. Eyes shadowed under the hood, beard flecked with frost, jaw tight, silent witness to everything the mountain demanded. "We'll fix some of that," he said. "Not all, not yet. But we can start with the small things." He rose then, moved to the cabin wall, pulling a worn blanket from a hook. It was thick, heavy, a muted brown that smelled of pine and smoke. He laid it across her shoulders. She flinched, then allowed it, the heat seeping slowly into her frozen body. The gesture was quiet, almost sacred. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a small stool near the fire. She did, knees drawn to her chest, hands clasped around the blanket. He handed her a mug of weak tea, made from dried herbs and pine needles, its scent unfamiliar yet grounding. "Drink, slow." She obeyed. The warmth slid down her throat, stirred her blood, pushed some of the frost from her bones. For the first time since being abandoned on the mountain, she felt a pulse of life, of possibility, however faint. He watched her drink, silent, attentive. Then, without turning, he muttered, "Snow makes everything louder. Every footstep, every breath, every heartbeat. It's easy to get lost out here, easy to disappear." He glanced at her, eyes sharp. "But not tonight, not while I am here." The words were not boastful, not protective in the way others might claim. They were simply fact, a statement of presence, of vigilance, of survival. She nodded slightly, barely, but it was enough. The day bled into afternoon. Snow continued its relentless fall. He worked quietly, tending the fire, chopping kindling, cleaning the cabin, preparing what little food they could manage. Her stomach tightened again, hunger gnawing like a living thing. He handed her the bowl again. "Eat," he said. No more words were needed. She did, slowly, carefully, the warmth from the meal mingling with the heat from the fire. Then he moved to the window, staring into the white void outside. "They'll come," he said, almost to himself. "Maybe not tonight, but someone will always think they can finish what they started." She looked at him, shivering, wrapped in blankets, small and fragile against the harsh winter. I can't fight," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said. "Not yet, not ever, if you don't want to. You only have to survive. That's enough." Her chest rose and fell quickly, eyes locked on his. There was a quiet strength in his gaze, something steady, immovable, a promise unspoken, but there. Protection without chains, warmth without conditions, presence without judgment. She had been sent to die, and here he was, a man who could have ended her, offering life instead. The snow fell harder. It pressed against the windows, buried the cabin in white, erased the world outside. Inside, they moved in quiet rhythm, two lives intersecting without need for questions, without immediate trust. Only the small gestures. A blanket draped, a bowl placed, a fire tended. And in that quiet, in that fragile warmth, she began to imagine survival. Not just the breath that rose from her lungs, or the warmth that slid into her bones, but life beyond the mountain, a place where snow did not always threaten death, where hands would not push her into the cold, where someone could offer more than fear. She did not know if she could speak her name yet. She did not know if she could trust it to another. But in that cabin, under the watch of the hunter who could have killed her, she dared to hope. Outside, the storm raged, indifferent and eternal. Inside, a fire glowed, food filled the stomach, warmth pressed against the skin, and for the first time since the mountain had claimed her, she felt, however small, the pulse of living. She lifted her eyes to him, and the weight of the world outside the cabin seemed to pause just for a moment in deference to the quiet miracle of warmth and presence, and in that stillness she breathed. Night had fallen deep over Bloodhunter Mountain. The storm outside was no longer a gentle whisper of snow, but a full chorus of wind and ice, scratching at the cabin walls and rattling the roof like a warning drum. Inside, the fire had dwindled to embers, casting long shadows across the rough-hewn logs. She sat on the cot, wrapped in the thick blanket he had offered, staring at the pale, trembling glow. He worked quietly near the small stove, chopping a few more pieces of wood and tending the embers. Each movement was deliberate, precise, almost ritualistic. It was as if the act itself carried the weight of survival, a rhythm against the chaos outside. She watched him, every breath measured, every motion controlled. Finally, she dared to speak, her voice trembling. Who are you?" He paused, glancing at her from under his hood. The firelight traced the sharp lines of his face, frost clinging to his beard, eyes like steel against the orange glow. "Someone who knows how to survive here," he said simply. "Someone who's learned the mountain does not forgive mistakes, but it rewards those who endure." The words were not boastful, not meant to impress. They carried the quiet weight of truth, a knowledge born from countless winters and long nights alone among the peaks and cliffs. She listened, letting each syllable sink into her bones, warming her more than the fire ever could. She shifted on the cot, drawing the blanket tighter around herself. They sent me," she said, voice cracking. "They said you would kill me, that it was my fate." He stopped his work entirely, turning fully to her. "Fate?" he asked, voice low, careful, each word deliberate. "Fate is for those who cannot carve their own path. You survived the snow, the cold, and their threats. That makes you alive, not dead." Her eyes brimmed with tears she did not let fall. She had not spoken for days, had not dared to feel, to hope. But in his presence, she sensed something forbidden: trust. A dangerous, fragile trust, but trust nonetheless. He rose and moved to the hearth, taking a metal basin filled with warm water. Carefully, almost ceremoniously, he poured some into a smaller bowl and handed it to her. "Wash your hands," he said. "They're too frozen to fight without them." She obeyed, the warmth of the water a shock to her icy fingers, sending small tremors up her arms. He watched silently, eyes shadowed, as though every movement she made was a testament to survival itself. Once she finished, he took a soft cloth and began drying her hands, his touch careful, respectful. Not intimate, not invasive, but grounding. "You have a name?" he asked once more. She shook her head. Nothing remained of her past here. Not in the snow, not in the wind, not in her own mind. Only hunger, cold, and fear. "Then we'll make one," he said. His voice was a quiet command, firm but gentle. "A name for now, a name to carry you through this storm." She felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, something she had thought extinguished. Possibility. She nodded faintly, eyes downcast. He moved to the cabin door, opening it slightly to peer out. The wind howled, biting, carrying the scent of ice and pine. "The storm is worse than any men I've ever faced," he said, almost to himself. "But worse yet are those who would send a girl like you to die in it." Her eyes lifted, meeting his. Why save me?" He turned, and for the first time, the weight of his gaze pressed on her. "Because some things are not meant to end in death," he said, voice low, unwavering. "Even when others think they should. You've endured enough. That's enough reason." The words pressed against her chest like a quiet hammer. Not promise, not comfort, truth. And in the middle of a mountain that had promised only death, it was almost too much to bear. He returned to the fire, laying another log carefully across the embers. "Sleep soon," he said. "Not because you're safe, not because the storm has passed, but because tomorrow we move. You're not staying here." She swallowed, the weight of that statement sinking in. Move? Where? She had no map, no supplies, no hope for survival beyond this cabin and this fire. But she did not speak. She did not question, not yet. Instead, she studied him, the hunter who could have killed her. The man who offered only life, only warmth, only protection. He moved like the mountain itself, deliberate, silent, unyielding. He was her enemy by rumor, her savior by choice. And in the quiet of that fire-lit cabin, she allowed herself the first small flicker of trust. The storm outside raged. Snow lashed against the walls, the wind moaning low through the timber. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and cooked roots, of survival and intent. She watched him, and for the first time since being abandoned to the snow, she felt something she had not known she could feel. Hope. Fragile, tentative, almost dangerous, but alive nonetheless. Hours passed. The wind lulled slightly, then returned with full force. She did not sleep. She could not. But she watched, and she learned. Every motion, every gesture, every quiet breath he took spoke more than words ever could. And slowly she understood. Survival was not about strength alone. It was about presence, awareness, timing, patience, and sometimes trust. He moved again toward her, crouching beside the cot. "The storm will not last forever," he said quietly, hand resting near hers on the blanket. "But it will test us. That is what mountains do. You will see." She nodded faintly, the first time she had acknowledged him without fear. The warmth of his presence, the fire, the food, the careful words, they were small, almost imperceptible gestures. But they were enough to keep her alive tonight. And tonight, that was everything. Outside, the mountain waited. The storm raged. The snow pressed down like a living weight. Inside, a fire glowed. A girl huddled in blankets. A hunter kept watch. And in that fragile quiet, survival was no longer an impossible promise. It was a choice. By morning, the storm had softened to a relentless gray drizzle, the snow transforming into ice-slicked paths that made each step a gamble. The hunter moved through the cabin with purpose, packing a small kit with dried meat, a canteen, a blanket, and the rifle slung across his back. The mountain was merciless, and he would not allow her to linger longer than necessary. Survival demanded movement. She shivered, standing in the corner, blanket clutched tightly around her shoulders, eyes tracking every move. The warmth of the fire from the night before had faded, replaced by the cold awareness of the world outside. He noticed her hesitation but said nothing. Words were for safety and necessity now, not comfort. "Come," he said finally, voice low, commanding but not cruel. She obeyed, each step tentative, unsure whether the mountain or the hunter would betray her first. Ice crunched underfoot, sharp and brittle. They moved carefully through the pines, the world muted under a thick white blanket. The wind sliced through the trees with sudden, violent bursts, and she instinctively pressed close to him, finding warmth in his coat, in the measured rhythm of his gait. Hours passed in silence. He led her along hidden paths, places marked by the faintest indentations in the snow and the subtle shifts of rock and root. She did not speak. She could not. Words were heavy in this cold, and each breath stolen in fear was measured against the weight of survival. At noon they paused near a small ravine, a frozen creek that whispered beneath the snow like a secret. He knelt, removing his pack, and drew out a small fire starter, striking flint against steel until sparks danced like fleeting stars. Carefully, deliberately, he coaxed a small flame into life. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the snow-covered rocks. She obeyed, knees drawn, hands pressed against her chest to hold in warmth. He handed her a small piece of dried meat. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware that each swallow was a temporary reprieve from the gnawing hunger. "The mountain," he said finally, voice low, almost a murmur against the wind, "doesn't forgive weakness, but it respects endurance." She looked at him, her dark eyes wide and unsteady. "And if I fail?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Then you do not survive. But failure is not an option. Survival is not about strength. It's about knowing when to move, when to wait, and when to trust." She swallowed, absorbing the words, feeling their weight press down on her shoulders. Trust. A dangerous, unfamiliar thing. She had been trained by terror, molded by cruelty into obedience, silence, and flight. And now, She was learning something else. Presence. A man could offer life, not take it, and it could be enough to redefine the world around her. They moved on. The forest thinned as they climbed higher, cliffs rising like sentinels, sharp and unyielding. Her boots slipped on the ice, her muscles aching from the effort. But he was always just behind her, a steady hand, a measured gaze, a presence that grounded her. She felt small, fragile, yet somehow tethered to life by his constancy. By evening, they reached a sheltered ledge. He built a small fire, stacking rocks around it to hold the heat. Smoke curled up, mixing with the clouds that hugged the mountain like a living thing. She wrapped herself in the heavy blanket, shivering, body trembling from cold and exertion. He sat beside her, leaning on his rifle, eyes scanning the ridge, silent sentinel. "They'll be coming," she said after a long while, voice quiet, almost lost. "Who?" he asked, not looking at her. "The men. The ones who sent me. They'll know I didn't die." He nodded slowly, eyes narrowing at the horizon. "Maybe. But we'll see them coming long before they see us, and we will survive. That is what the mountain teaches." She shivered, hugging her knees, the blanket failing to hold the frost at bay. He removed his own coat, heavy and worn, and draped it over her shoulders. She flinched slightly at the touch, unfamiliar, startling. He did not move away. "It's not about comfort," he said. "It's about survival. Stay warm, stay alive. That is enough for tonight." The fire crackled, shadows flickering across the ice and rock. Her thoughts, long buried under terror and cold, began to creep forward. The faces of those who had sent her, the rope that had cut her wrists, the wind that had carried their laughter like knives through the forest. Her breath caught in her throat, and she turned away from him, hiding her face in the coat, trying not to cry. He watched, silent, understanding. No words came. None were needed. The mountain demanded patience, endurance, and awareness. He offered all three without command, without intrusion, without expectation. She felt the first real warmth she had known since being abandoned. Not in food, not in shelter, not even fully in her own body, but in presence. Hours passed. Darkness thickened, the wind keening like a living thing. The fire waned, and still they sat, side by side in fragile silence. And then, just before sleep claimed her, she dared to look at him. You could have killed me," she said, voice small, hesitant. "Why didn't you?" "Why?" He looked at her, eyes shadowed, expression unreadable. "Because some things are not meant to die, and some people can still choose to live." Her fingers, cold and stiff, brushed against his hand briefly. It was accidental, almost nothing, but it anchored her in the world, in life, in the warmth of fire and presence. She slept little that night, wrapped in his coat, near the embers of the fire. The storm had retreated to whispers, but the mountain still loomed, indifferent and eternal. Outside, the snow glinted pale under the moonlight, winds sighing through the skeletal trees. Inside, she slept, and the hunter watched, sentinel and guardian, waiting for the dawn that would demand movement, endurance, and survival. In the gray hours before sunrise, the first thought that came to her mind was not of fear, not of death, but of the possibility that she might yet live, that she might survive the mountain, the storm, and those who had sent her to die. That presence, warmth, and small kindness could defy the world outside, even in a place where mercy was rare and survival was everything. And for the first time since her journey began, she let herself believe in that fragile, improbable possibility. Dawn came pale and quiet, the snow crusted with ice, glinting like shards of glass under the weak sun. The mountain exhaled slowly, the wind softened, carrying only the faint rustle of pine needles and the distant creak of frozen branches. She awoke stiff and sore, wrapped in the hunter's coat, the lingering warmth clinging stubbornly to her skin. He was already moving, kneeling by the fire, rekindling embers with practiced hands. Each spark seemed to echo against the cliff walls, a reminder that life could persist even in places that seemed bent on erasure. He turned at her gaze, eyes soft but unwavering. "Time to move," he said, voice low. No one waits for the mountain, and no one survives by standing still. She rose, coat wrapped tightly around her, boots crunching over the frozen snow. Every movement was careful, deliberate. She had learned in the hours and nights past that mistakes here meant death. And yet, she felt something she had not known in weeks. Confidence. Fragile, yes, but enough to guide her. The path was steep, jagged, and unforgiving. Every step had to be measured, every sound considered. The wind tugged at their coats, snatched at scarves and scarves of loose hair. The mountain seemed alive, watching, testing them. But they moved in tandem, a rhythm born of shared survival, instinctive and unspoken. Hours passed with no sound but the scraping of boots against ice, the labored breaths that misted in the cold, and then the first sign of men. Faint footprints pressed into the snow, too precise, too deliberate to be animals. She froze, heart pounding, the familiar surge of terror rising. He stopped, hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "Do not speak. Do not move, unless I tell you," he whispered. His eyes scanned the horizon, sharp as hawks, noting the angles, the shadows, the spaces where the men could hide. Every instinct he had honed over decades in these mountains pulsed in his movements. "They sent me to die," she murmured, voice barely a whisper, almost swallowed by the wind. He did not respond. He only nodded once, the single movement a promise. Not for death, but for life. The men came into view, 3 figures, rifles raised, clothing ill-suited for the mountain. They had assumed she would not endure the storm, not survive the climb. They had assumed wrong. He moved first. A low whistle, soft, almost imperceptible. She flinched, gripping the blanket tighter. The hunter's rifle was raised in one hand, his stance steady, controlled. He did not aim to kill yet, just enough to command attention. The men froze, uncertainty rippling through them. They had expected an abandoned frozen girl, not the predator waiting with calm certainty at the mountain's edge. "Step back," he said, voice carrying across the white expanse, calm but with the unyielding authority of a man who had chosen to live and allowed another to survive. "She is not yours to take." The tallest of the 3 laughed, a short, brittle sound that cracked against the mountain air. "We were told she'd be dead, hunted by the wind. You're just a man hiding in the snow." He did not flinch. He did not argue. He only stepped forward slightly, raising the rifle, steady, deliberate. "I am not hiding, and she is not yours. Step away, or you will leave here less than you came." The men hesitated, sensing the danger, the certainty in the hunter's eyes, the rhythm of survival embedded in every movement. He was not bluffing. Every inch of the mountain belonged to him, every crevice, every ledge, and he would not surrender it to fools or killers. She watched from behind, barely breathing, the snow frozen in her hair, her fingers numb. But for the first time she did not feel fear alone. She felt trust. Not blind, not naive, but hard-earned, built from nights of fire, warmth, and silent witness. The leader of the men cursed under his breath, stepping back, reassessing. The hunter's presence, the mountain itself, seemed to hold them in place, anchored by something older than law, older than men. Survival, strength, vigilance. Finally the men lowered their rifles, muttering, unsure. The mountain's weight pressed down on them, indifferent and absolute. They had come to claim death, and instead they found life, and life that would not be yielded. Once the men disappeared, swallowed by the distant ridges and snow, he lowered his rifle, exhaling slowly. His eyes met hers, and in that gaze was a message without words. You survived. You will continue to survive. She stepped forward, tentatively, and he did not pull away. Instead, he offered a hand. She took it, feeling the rough calluses, the warmth of his presence, the steadfast rhythm of a man who had chosen her life over death. "You're alive," she whispered, voice thick with disbelief and wonder. "Yes," he said, voice low, certain. "Because you chose to survive, and because I chose to keep you alive." For the first time she dared to speak her name, fragile but clear. "Maris," she said. It sounded strange in her own mouth, unfamiliar, but it fit, as if the snow itself had whispered it to her while she slept. He nodded slowly, acknowledging the name as a promise, a tether to life and possibility. Maris, he repeated. It suits you. The mountain was quiet now, the storm receding into distant moans and sighs. Sunlight broke faintly through clouds, glinting off ice like shards of crystal. She felt the cold, but not as sharply. She felt the warmth of fire, of food, of presence, and the promise of life sustained by someone who could have chosen differently. They moved together down the ridge, cautious, deliberate, step by step, carrying the rhythm of survival with them. Each movement was a negotiation with the mountain, with the snow, with fear, and each step reinforced what she had learned. Life could exist even where death had been promised. By late afternoon, they reached a sheltered grove, a place where the trees stood close, shielding them from the wind. He set up a small fire, and she sat close, letting the warmth seep into her frozen bones. He handed her food again, small, humble portions, but sufficient. She ate in silence, watching him, understanding now that survival was not just about avoiding death. It was about presence, care, vigilance, and trust. He had offered all of those things without asking, without demand, without expectation. As the fire crackled, she allowed herself to lean slightly toward him, a gesture of recognition, not intimacy, not dependence, just acknowledgement of the life he had preserved. "Thank you," she whispered finally, her voice raw, fragile, honest. He did not respond with words. He only offered a steady gaze, a subtle nod, the quiet assurance of someone who had walked the mountain alone for years and understood that life could be claimed, protected, and preserved. Not because it was owed, but because it was chosen. Night fell again. But this time, it did not terrify her. The wind howled, the snow drifted, the mountains waited. But inside, she was safe. She had a name, she had warmth, she had food, she had him. And for the first time since being sent to die, she allowed herself to imagine tomorrow, and the days beyond, and the possibility of living. The mountain still loomed, eternal and indifferent. But she was no longer merely a girl fleeing death. She was Maris, alive, sustained, and protected. And the hunter, who could have ended her, had given her life instead. The fire burned low, embers glowing faintly, carrying the weight of survival and choice. And somewhere in the stillness of the night, beneath the silent stars, she knew life, however fragile, could endure even on Bloodhunter Mountain.